During the Triassic period, dinosaurs were not yet the dominant large animals, with the world's ecosystems being filled by an even more diverse assortment of creatures. Among the more unusual was the heavily armored, herbivorous reptile Revueltosaurus calendari. At first glance, this four-legged plant-eater may seem almost mundane, but paleontologists have described Revueltosaurus as the duck-billed platypus of the Triassic period. It had an unusual collection of traits found in other reptiles, among the most notable being a club-like structure at the end of its tail, reminiscent of those found in the later ankylosaurid dinosaurs. Additionally, although not a dinosaur itself, the story of Revueltosaurus is closely tied to the origins of ornithischian, one of the three major branches of Dinosauria. Revueltosaurus calendari lived in what is now North America during the Norian age of the Late Triassic, between 218 to 210 million years ago. Revueltosaurus means revolutionary lizard. This name was chosen in reference to the location its first fossils were found in, the New Mexican Revuelto Creek, but it was also noted in the description that the name is very fitting for a Triassic taxon. The fauna of the Triassic period was both strange, and the period marked the origin point for a number of important modern groups. Revueltosaurus's species name, calendari, was given in honor of Jonathan F. Callender, the then director of the New Mexico Museum of Natural History, for his support of paleontology. When it was first found in 1989, Revueltosaurus calendari was only known from teeth. They resembled the leaf-shaped teeth common in early ornithischian dinosaurs, so it should be little surprise that Revueltosaurus was originally mistaken for one. It was not until 2004 that bones of Revueltosaurus that could be tied to the teeth were found. Most of these skeletons have come from a single site in the Arizonan Petrified Forest National Park. Called the Revueltosaurus Quarry, this bone bed almost exclusively contains Revueltosaurus fossils, some of which are nearly complete. Several other fragmentary Triassic taxa once thought to be dinosaurs, such as Pechinosaurus and Galtonia, were later assigned to Revueltosaurus, with some of them being reclassified as additional species of Revueltosaurus. However, in 2021, a full description of Revueltosaurus was published, and the authors concluded that Revueltosaurus calendari is the only definitive species of Revueltosaurus. This was the same paper that first recognized its tail club. Revueltosaurus fossils are mostly found in the American Southwest, although some of the assigned material may extend its range to the North American East Coast. Revueltosaurus was a Pseudosuchian, meaning it belonged to the group of reptiles more closely related to modern crocodilians than to dinosaurs. Although crocodilians are the only remaining members of the clade, Pseudosuchia was much more diverse during the late Triassic. Besides semi-aquatic predators, it included herbivores, as exemplified by Revueltosaurus itself, apex predators like the contemporary Pseudosuchus, and even the bipedal, toothless Shuvosaurus. Indeed, it was Pseudosuchians, not dinosaurs, who were the most abundant large animals during the late Triassic. However, they were still close relatives, as they both belonged to the larger clade Archosauria, the ruling reptiles. Revueltosaurus was a member of the Pseudosuchian subclade Atosauriformes. The most famous Atosauriforms were the namesake Atosaurs, armored reptiles that bore an even greater resemblance to the ankylosaurs than Revueltosaurus did. Just as in the Dinosaurian tanks, the armor of both Revueltosaurus and Atosaurs consisted of osteoderms, bony plates that grew within their skin. Osteoderms were common across Pseudosuchia, and are retained in the crocodilians of today. Revueltosaurus is the only Atosauriform known from substantial fossil material that isn't an Atosaur. It is held to bridge the gap between the specialized Atosaurs and the rest of Pseudosuchia. It is important to note that Revueltosaurus itself was not their direct ancestor, as it coexisted with a number of Atosaurs, such as Desmatosuchus. It also possesses a number of traits that distinguish it from the Atosaurs, some of them unique, or convergent with other types of Triassic reptiles. Indeed, although it is firmly placed in Atosauriformes, Revueltosaurus' skeleton contains a number of seemingly random features of other Pseudosuchians, in addition to its dinosaur-like teeth and tail club, hence the moniker Triassic platypus. There were a few other basal atosauroforms, such as Ankylosauris and Euskolosuchus, that were similar to Revueltosaurus, and some fossils tentatively assigned to Revueltosaurus may instead belong to other close relatives. Therefore, Revueltosaurus is science's best window into an otherwise enigmatic branch of Pseudosuchia. Unlike atosaurs, which are widespread across the globe, members of Revueltosaurus's currently unnamed subclade of Atosauriformes have only been found in North America. The size of Revueltosaurus is often cited as 1 meter long, although some individuals were at least 40% larger than that. In any event, Revueltosaurus was substantially smaller than most of his atosaur cousins. A few atosaurs, including the namesake Atosaurus, might have been as small or smaller, although recent research suggests that the smaller atosaurs may actually represent the juvenile forms of larger species. One of Revueltosaurus's most important traits was its osteoderm armor, which also formed its impressive tail club. Its armor covered its back, belly, and tail. The osteoderms on its back primarily consisted of a main pair called the paramedian osteoderms, with each pair corresponding with a particular vertebra. Paramedian osteoderms were almost ubiquitous among Triassic Pseudosuchians, but those of Revueltosaurus were flanked by a second pair of osteoderms. They were wider than long, much like those of the even more extensively armored atosaurs. Indeed, their osteoderms are so similar that Revueltosaurus's osteoderms were once mistaken for those of juvenile atosaurs, just like its teeth were once mistaken for those of ornithischian dinosaurs. However, while similar, the osteoderms of Revueltosaurus lacked the spikes seen in some species of atosaur, and were also absent on its flanks. The osteoderms at the top of Revueltosaurus's tail were a direct continuation of its paramedian osteoderms, but there was a gap between those on the lower tail and the belly. The belly armor was also arranged into columns, but their number exceeded the rows on the back in some regions. Atosaurs had small osteoderms on their limbs for additional protection, but it is currently unclear if the same was true for Revueltosaurus. Although smaller and not as well armored as the atosaurs, its tail club seems to have made up for this. It was formed from a number of osteoderms that co-ossified into a single, hollow structure. The club is not preserved well enough in any specimen to determine its exact shape, but the osteoderms were thicker at the tip, implying it was used as a weapon. If so, Revueltosaurus would be the oldest known animal to have had such a weapon in its arsenal. Besides the ankylosaurids, other animals that evolved tail clubs include some sauropod dinosaurs such as Pseudosuchian and Amyosaurus, giant armadillos called glyphodonts, and close relatives of turtles named Meiolaniids. With its long tail, the Triassic platypus was well suited to take advantage of this weapon. Unfortunately, since the tail club was only recognized in 2021, most reconstructions of Revueltosaurus lack this distinguishing feature. That said, the older art may not be outright wrong. Some recent research suggests that the main function of ankylosaurid tail clubs was not to ward off predators, but to battle rivals over territory or to impress mates. Revueltosaurus may have used its tail club for similar purposes, as it was too small to be effective against the largest local carnivores. Most specimens are not preserved in sufficient condition to determine whether or not they had clubs, so they could have been sexually dimorphic, being restricted to only a single sex. Indeed, given how the tail club was identified from a subadult, this structure may have been larger and even more impressive in the adults. Also, even if it was not its primary purpose, the tail club would have still been useful against small predators, such as the carnivorous dinosaur Chindisaurus. In any event, despite the similarities between the armor of atosaurs and Revueltosaurus, and the fact that most atosaurs were also plant eaters, their skulls were radically different from each other. Revueltosaurus' skull was broader, taller, and wider than those of its relatively more iconic relatives. Additionally, whereas the heads of atosaurs were small for their body size, the skull of Revueltosaurus was proportionally large for a Pseudosuchian, despite its short snout. The opposite was true of their nasal openings. Those of atosaurs were enlarged, implying a good sense of smell. In contrast, Revueltosaurus' nasal openings were greatly diminished in size compared to those of its ancestors. Its nasals fit into a socket in the premaxilla, the bone at the end of the snout. Among Pseudosuchians, this condition is otherwise only known in Gracillosuchids such as Tyrphanosuchus. Gracillosuchidae has been found to be closely related to Adasauriformes in some phylogenetic analyses, so their similar snouts may have been the result of common ancestry rather than convergent evolution. Archosaurs ancestrally had an opening between the orbits and nasals called the antorbital fenestra. In Revueltosaurus, most of the antorbital fenestra was closed, but a depression, called the antorbital fossa, remained where it had been in its ancestors. A large ridge located on the maxilla ran underneath the antorbital fossa. A similar maxillary ridge was present in another Pseudosuchian. However, it wasn't a member of Adasauriformes, but instead the carnivorous Postosuchus, which belonged to Revueltosauridae, a completely different and only distantly related branch of Pseudosuchia. Revueltosaurus was not called the Triassic platypus for nothing. As mentioned earlier, Revueltosaurus's serrated, leaf-shaped teeth are almost identical to those of many ornithischian dinosaurs. Like Postosuchus, the similarities between them are the result of convergent evolution, meaning they evolved independently from each other. As no ornithischians are known from the same ecosystems as Revueltosaurus, it is probable they evolved to eat similar types of plants. One of the few major distinctions between their teeth was that those of Revueltosaurus are not swollen at the base as in ornithischians. It is important to note that some Adasaurs had teeth that were both leaf-shaped and serrated, but their overall shape was distinct from those of ornithischians. On the other hand, the placement of Revueltosaurus's dentition was slightly different from those of either Adasaurs or ornithischians. Its teeth extended to the tip of the snout, while in Adasaurs, the end of the lower jaw and often the upper jaw were instead toothless. As for ornithischian dinosaurs, the teeth located in their premaxilla curved towards the tongue. This was also true of Revueltosaurus, but the condition also extended to some of its dentary teeth. The thickness of Revueltosaurus's teeth was comparable to that of the Revueltosuchids and the bone-crushing tyrannosaurid dinosaurs. While a plant eater like Revueltosaurus was likely not ripping carcasses apart, the thickened enamel coating would have given its teeth increased resistance against abrasion, allowing it to safely engage in otherwise risky feeding behavior, such as swiftly stripping woody branches of their leaves. Supporting this, a higher number of growth lines in Revueltosaurus's dentition suggests its teeth didn't need to be replaced as quickly compared to its relatives. While Pseudosuchians are stereotyped as carnivores, Revueltosaurus and the Adasaurs were not the last herbivorous Pseudosuchians. Plant-eating crocodilomorphs evolved to replace them as soon as the early Jurassic, and herbivorous crocodilomorphs persisted all the way to the end of the Cretaceous period and the end of the Age of Reptiles. Revueltosaurus's legs were held in a more upright stance than modern crocodilians. This was actually the ancestral condition of Archosauria, with the semi-erect stance of crocodilians representing an evolutionary reversal. Something they shared is what is called the crocodile normal ankle. Dinosaur ankles are simple hinges. Pseudosuchians have a more flexible arrangement, where the point of flexation is between two bones called the astragalus and the calcaneum. Once skeletons belonging to Revueltosaurus were found, the presence of the crocodile normal ankle helped scientists quickly recognize that it wasn't a dinosaur. Although some specimens are nearly complete, only a single gastralium, or belly rib, belonging to Revueltosaurus has been found. The closely related Adasaurs had fewer gastralia than most other Triassic Pseudosuchians, which suggests the same was true of Revueltosaurus. Archosaurs ancestrally had fairly high metabolisms, allowing them to grow quicker, be more active, and to grow faster than most other reptiles. Elevated metabolisms were the norm among Triassic Pseudosuchians, but study of Revueltosaurus's internal bone structure indicates it was an exception to the rule. Its bone shows signs of slow growth. Despite not belonging to adults, and only reaching a length of about 1 meter, the examined specimens were already between 4 to 5 years old when they died. Most other Pseudosuchians were able to grow far larger over a much shorter period of time. That said, the metabolic rate of Revueltosaurus was still much higher than that of modern crocodilians, who have reverted to an outright ectothermic metabolism. Like Revueltosaurus, Adasaurs also had fairly low growth rates, which should be little surprise given their close relationship. The same was true for the evolutionarily convergent ankylosaurian dinosaurs, suggesting the reason for Revueltosaurus' slower growth, and presumably lower metabolism, was due to its heavy armor. It would have reduced the maximum speed of these armored reptiles, and thus inhibit their capacity to take advantage of the increased activity levels offered by a high metabolism. Additionally, a major source of evolutionary pressure for rapid growth is the need to become less vulnerable to carnivores. Revueltosaurus' extensive osteoderms would have offered it a degree of protection even during its early years, reducing the urgency for rapidly reaching adulthood. However, while it was better able to defend itself than most equally sized herbivores, Revueltosaurus was still a potential meal for larger predators such as Pseudosuchian. The fossilized regurgitated bones of a Revueltosaurus that have been eaten by one of these carnivores attest to this. There is evidence that Revueltosaurus further protected themselves with a common strategy of safety in numbers. As mentioned earlier, 12 Revueltosaurus skeletons have been found together in the Arizonan Revueltosaurus quarry. Almost all fossils at the site belong to the Triassic platypus, the only exception being the teeth of semi-aquatic Pseudosuchians called phytosaurs. The taphonomy of the Revueltosaurus skeletons suggests they were not buried immediately after they died, so the phytosaurs may have scavenged upon their bodies, losing a few teeth in the process. Some bones belonging to Pseudosaurids, bipedal Pseudosuchians with toothless beaks, are also present in the quarry, but these were reworked into the site long after they had fossilized. All the Revueltosaurus specimens found at the quarry appear to be either juveniles or subadults. Furthermore, they are roughly the same age, implying their social groups were formed from siblings belonging to the same clutch. The same is thought to have been true of Adosaurus, as 20 juvenile skeletons of this reptile have been found preserved together. Other Pseudosuchians have also been found in what appears to have been social groups, including Lodosaurus and Decuriasuchus, which might represent the juvenile form of the much larger carnivore Prehistoric. It thus seems that early Pseudosuchians commonly lived in herds or packs, at least during their youth. Once they reached their full size, they would have been able to better defend themselves, and may have shifted to a solitary existence. The other site bearing substantial Revueltosaurus skeletal material, the Giving site, contains individuals of various ages, including adults. However, it also contains the fossils of numerous other species, ranging from Adosaurs to Dinosaurs, so these Revueltosaurus fossils do not necessarily represent a social group. The discovery that Revueltosaurus was a Pseudosuchian rather than a dinosaur sent shockwaves in science's understanding of early dinosaur diversity. When the Triassic platypus's true identity was revealed in 2004, only 2 of the 3 major branches of Dinosauria were well represented in the fossil record. These were the carnivorous theropods, which included Coelophysis, and the long-necked Sauropodomorphs, one of the best understood early members being Plateosaurus. Members of Ornithischian, the third branch of Dinosauria, were predominantly herbivores, and even included the ankylosaurs that converged upon so many of the same traits as Revueltosaurus and the Adosaurs. The earliest Ornithischians known from good fossil material were small bipeds. The problem is that their skeletons date to the early Jurassic, not the preceding Triassic. The fossil record of Ornithischia during the Triassic period consisted of only sparse and highly incomplete remains. With the recognition that Revueltosaurus had been misidentified, this placed the identity of many of the other supposedly Triassic Ornithischian fossils in doubt. Worse, subsequent discoveries found that there were other Triassic reptiles with Ornithischian-like teeth. These included distant relatives of the archosaurs called Zendosaurids, and the Silosaurids, which are usually considered to be the closest relatives of the dinosaurs. This close relationship meant that Silosaurids and early Ornithischian dinosaurs had a lot of traits in common besides their teeth, and thus the fragmentary remains of one could easily be mistaken for the other. In light of this, some paleontologists concluded that none of the purported Triassic Ornithischian fossils found over the years could confidently be assigned to the clade. In response, some theorize that Ornithischian dinosaurs did not originate in the Triassic period at all, but instead during the early Jurassic. Since Ornithischia has traditionally been considered the earliest branch of Dinosauria to split off, an early Jurassic origin would require rewriting the entire dinosaur family tree. The ramifications of uncovering the first Revueltosaurus skeletons extended far beyond the small Pseudosuchian itself. In recent years, a less dramatic solution has been proposed that may resolve the mystery of the missing Triassic ornithischians. An increasing number of paleontologists consider the Silurids to not just be relatives of the dinosaurs, but to be actual dinosaurs, specifically the missing Triassic ornithischians, with some of them representing the transition to the more familiar early Jurassic species. Silurids, which is the correct term for them if they are actually dinosaurs, filled a greater number of niches than was once thought to be the case for basal ornithischians, as some are insectivores or even carnivores. However, other Silurids, such as a contemporary of Revueltosaurus named Quanosaurus, were herbivores. Given their similar teeth, there was likely at least some competition between these two reptiles. If the hypothesis that Silurids are ornithischians turns out to be true, then Revueltosaurus has helped to greatly expand the known number of dinosaurs, as well as their early diversity. Revueltosaurus is not nearly as famous as the dinosaurs or even the Adasaurs, but it was a fantastic animal. With its tail club, it was the first animal to evolve a defensive strategy that was later used to great effect by a number of species. From its teeth to its maxillary ridge, Revueltosaurus also combined the traits of a number of different dinosaurs and fellow Pseudosuchians. The Triassic platypus has also helped to expand the known diversity of Pseudosuchia and the rest of the already dazzling Triassic fauna. Finally, Revueltosaurus is among the few creatures that can be said to have shaken the entire dinosaur family tree. While little is known about it when it was first named from little more than teeth, Revueltosaurus is truly deserving of the name Revolutionary Lizard. Thank you for watching, and a thank you to my supporters on Patreon, who chose the subject of this video. Also, a thank you to Literally Miguel for making art for this video. This is a remake of one of my older videos. At the end of that one, I noted that a full description of Revueltosaurus had yet to be published, and this video is a result of that changing. If you enjoyed it, please remember to hit the like button, and consider subscribing if you'd like to see more. If you'd like to support this channel more directly, you can join my Patreon, where you'll have access to polls to select the topics of future videos. Finally, be sure to have a great day.